Good morning. Welcome to our study this morning. We're continuing our series on the conscience, morality, and the spiritual life, and we're on lessons 41 and 42 today. And we're almost finished with the introduction. The introduction includes the information from Jonathan Haidt on the moral foundations that he has uncovered, several other people that we have talked about, and then a review of the Enneagram system. One of the systems that we will use in identifying the continuum of morality in the human nature, the moral system that is designed for the sustenance of a nation so that it might be sustained without crime and violence taking over the nation. Mankind has, as part of the sinful nature, the evil nature, the human nature inherited from Adam, the capacity to do both good and evil, as we saw from the study of Genesis, the fruit of the tree of good and evil provided both a human good and a human bad or sinful nature. We find in studying the efforts of psychologists and philosophers to understand humanity, that they understand this morality, immorality continuum in various ways. And the Enneagram is probably the best example I have seen of placing categorical information together to be able to understand how human nature really works. It doesn't quite fit our model of the 6 human happiness motivators that we have found, the 6 elements of the sinful nature, the 6 elements of our human nature that we use in trying to be happy in one way or another. Those, as you probably well know, are known by 2 acronyms that we've come up with. One, SCRAPM, S-C-R-A-P-M, to give us the concept that we need to avoid these human nature attempts at living a spiritual life, but to utilize our spiritual nature instead. The other acronym is CRAMPS, because I have come up with the idea that in our spiritual walk, what breaks us down, what prevents us from proceeding in our spiritual walk are these cramps in our walk, in our legs, and CRAMPS is the acronym that we're currently using. Chemical, religious, approbation, materialism, power, and sexual desires that we all have for happiness to try to become happy. And I've not found any other than those 6 that fulfill that role, that everything that we do related to trying to be happy, trying to be moral, or even our sinful natures always breaks down in every instance that I have uncovered in the scriptures to these 6 areas. And of course the number 6 is the number of man, so it makes sense, but if we ever find another one, we'll go ahead and add that to the list. Today we're looking at lessons 41 and 42. We're going to do a little short review of the 2 and the 3. And I'm going to give you an example from today's news about a 3, one of the Enneagram 3s. I'm going to try to start incorporating more and more of these examples. We'll probably go back and give you examples from some of the others that we've covered previously, the 2 and the 3, for example. And then as we get all the way through these, hopefully I'll have examples from the media on how these act, so you can see it in real life situations. Before we begin our study, it's our custom to spend a moment in silent prayer so that we might utilize 1 John 1:9 if we need to confess any known sins so that we can recover the filling of the Spirit, so that we might walk by the Spirit, so that we might avoid these cramps in our walk. And so if you need to, use this silent prayer time to confess any known sins to the Father. Father, as we prepare to study this hour, we ask for the Spirit's mentorship in showing us how this all fits together with what you have given us in your word and in our nature that you have given us through the new birth. We ask that he show us how we fit into these roles of the human nature substitutes for our spiritual life so that we might be able to learn to reckon ourselves dead to them and to resist them and to maintain our walk in the spiritual nature. We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen. Did I say unknown sins or unconfessed sins? All of a sudden I thought, was I saying confess your unknown sins? That's pretty hard to do. So that meant unconfessed if I did say unknown. Review of the approbation types. Remember, the Enneagram has 9 different types that we have seen, and they include 3 basic categories of our human nature study: the approbation types, the power types, and the religious types. Now, because the Enneagram doesn't break people down into the 6, it doesn't follow an exact breakdown the way we would break them down, but they're essentially, they fall into those areas with some ramifications. There'll be some of these approbation types that have some sexual motivation involved, or some power motivation, or some materialism motivation. So we'll separate all of that out when we get to our conclusion of our study, where we look at the continuum of the 6 human nature happiness motivators. So for now, though, to try to get you up to speed, get you thinking along these lines, to be able to see yourself how these things play out, we're going to continue our review of them. So the approbation types are the 2, the 3, and the 4. The 2 is known as the pleaser. They seek love by being pleasing, self-sacrificing, but of course on the negative side, on the sinful nature side of our human nature, they become prideful, resentful, and angry. The 3 is known as the overachiever or the succeeder. They seek approval by being productive, by overachieving, and they tend to avoid their emotions. The 4 is the dramatic individualist. They seek acceptance with their unique expression and dramatic stories, and they hold on to their tragedy in life. Now we're going to look, actually this will be more of a preview than a review, but since we've covered them in the past a few years ago, this will be a review somewhat of the power types. That's the 5, 6, and 7 in the Enneagram. The 5 is the observer. They seek peace by avoiding life. They isolate and live in their fantasies. They avoid life by staying inside their head, analyzing everything. The 6 is the doubting loyalist. They seek security by being hypervigilant. They always wonder, what if? And they want to avoid change. They want to avoid danger. They think up dangerous scenarios and make plans on how they can react in those dangerous scenarios. The 7 is the experience seeker. They go a little different way. Instead of being so mental about it like the 5 and the 6, they want to be very physical because they have a little chemical motivation in their activities, and so they're in their way of thinking. And so they seek a sense of inner guidance and support through outside experience. They avoid introspection. They want activity to keep them busy so that they don't have to face their fears that they have. So all of these power types are based around fear. They are afraid of something, and they have to try to deal with that by having happiness through power. Power means control. We all have control issues all the time. These types have a greater amount of issues with control, wanting to be in control of their emotions, in control of their situation, in control of their thoughts, in control of their circumstances. Who can get to me? What can happen to me? Those kinds of things. Then we have the religious types and the Enneagram known as the 8s, the 9s, and the 1s. The 8 is called the aggressive challenger by some authors. They seek power. Notice this says seek power by bullying others. They avoid feeling weak and deny being wrong. The 8's primary motivation is religious. They are primarily known as the rescuer, the knight on the white horse. They have an issue with fairness, with justice. They want everything to be done in accordance with fairness and justice. The 9 is known as the one who has this comfortable indolence. They seek comfort by avoiding conflict and dynamic situations. They are the peacekeepers, is also another name for them. They want peace, and they want peace to the extent that they will try to avoid life, and they can be very pleasant to be around, but their negative side, they become passive aggressive to try to get their way because they don't want any conflict. Their whole religious motivation is peace, is to have peace in life. The 1 is the perfectionist. The 1 is the one who wants everything to be right, to be true. They are the righteousness religious motivated. They seek perfection internally and externally. They see imperfections and they try to fix them. They hold in their anger and they become tense. So these are representative of the 3 arenas of the sinful nature. If you'll note here, I have, see if I can get this thing to move. I probably can't because we had a little problem with our board this morning. The inherited genetic human nature of from Adam is the IGHNA. It's the long version. The inherited genetic human nature from Adam. And we have these happiness attainment motivators. What can I do to be happy? And it's not so much always a cognitive decision that we make. How can I be happy? It is something that sometimes just happens because it is genetic. We just grow that way because that's how we have taken it from our ancestors all the way back to Adam. And the lust of the flesh is not flesh in terms of the sinful nature per se, but specifically the flesh, the body. And the flesh has 2 primary motivators: sexual lust and chemical lust, things that make the body feel better. Sex and chemicals. The chemicals can be anything from external chemicals that we take, alcohol, drugs, that sort of thing, chocolate, whatever it happens to be, to the internal chemicals, the endorphins, the enkephalins that we have and that we see so much in runners who are addicted to running because of the endorphin high that they get. So that chemical can range from external to internal, like endorphins and enkephalins, but also relates to the brain chemistry itself. The brain chemistry needs certain chemicals in order to function, to be happy. And if we don't have those chemicals, then we have to come up with an alternative way to try to be happy. And that can lead to all kinds of things. So this takes into account that we have a physical body that we live in and that we have to deal with it. The next group is the lust of the eyes, and this is the things that we see around us that we want. And so that basically breaks down into materialism. And materialism has a continuum from all the way from the high end of wanting everything, wanting to be rich, to have everything there is, all the way to the end of materialistic people can be just about surviving, just have enough, that they're very minimalist in their materialistic needs. And but it's very important to them that they're that way, that they can be happy with very little, because if they have a lot, it's more conflict, it's more problem in their life. So materialism has that has that range as well. Then we have the pride of life and the inherited genetic human nature from Adam. Happiness motivators for that are power, approbation, and religion. That we can control, that we can gain approval from others, or that we can make sure everything is right. There are the instinctive subtypes that we looked at before in somewhat of a detailed study, and we're going to mention them in our studies of the 4, and the 5 today. So I thought we should review our basic definitions of them. We have the self-preserving, self-preservation type. They're primarily materialism, their nest, their home, their circumstances. They are very materialistic in their way of thinking, which adds that particular happiness attainment motivator to our list of the original 3 that we saw in the 9 types. Now we have a 4th one, materialism. And then we have the social type, and they are concerned with the approval of a group. Could be a small group, could be a large group, but they're concerned about the approbation motivation. So actually this is a duplication of one of the original 3 happiness attainment motivators that we see in the 9 Enneagram types. And the reason we see this as a subtype, an instinctive subtype that matches the 3 types, is that approbation is pretty much the center of all of our lives. Everyone wants to have that approval, and so they observed in their studies of people when they came up with the Enneagram that everyone, no matter who you are, come up and have this desire to be accepted, approved, to be loved, to be cared for, to be respected. All of the different aspects of approbation are in the other 6 types of the Enneagram. So they added it as a subtype. It's basic to everyone. And as we saw when we looked at some of our previous studies here, that for example, when we looked at the DMS-4, the personality disorders are nearly always, not always, but nearly always associated with approbation. Over 90% of these personality disorders revolved around approbation. There was some materialism and there was some power, but mostly approbation, because it's just basic to humanity to be selfish, to have selfism, to be concerned about me and how I relate to the world. The third instinctive subtype is sexual, and that adds the sexual ham, the sexual happiness attainment motivator that we have in our human nature. And so that gives us now 5 of the 6. The only one missing from the Enneagram discussion is the chemical. They didn't recognize chemical back in the old days when this was being forged. So they missed out on the fact that it's chemical. Now you'll see chemical in various Enneagram types. You'll see it in, for example, the 9, the 4, the 7. They're very much chemically motivated as well. The 9 doesn't want any kind of conflict. They don't want stimulation of the chemicals of their brain. And if there's a problem, they will go to taking outside chemicals to try to dull that. The 4 is the one that tends to be melancholy and depressed. They have learned to kind of be happy in their depression, which sounds like an oxymoron, but they have come to accept it and to use it as part of their means of getting the approval of others. They want to be respected for being different. They want to be cared for because they are different. They want you to love them because they have suffered so much. And so that's a chemical aspect. The 7, of course, is the chemical stimulation that they want from external activities, doing things that are dangerous, doing things that are exciting, so that they keep those endorphins and those enkephalins. So when we're like that, it is a 7 type in the Enneagram system that we're looking at. Once again, we must give this caveat that we don't endorse the Enneagram system as the means of trying to solve your problems in life, but to identify your problems in life, how you are acting like a human rather than like the Lord Jesus Christ, whose image we are to be conformed to by our new natures, by our human nature, by our spiritual nature that we receive in the new birth. God did not send his Son to die for our sins so that he could remodel our human nature. He sent his Son to die for our sins so that we might have newness of life, not renovated life, but newness of life, so that we might have a whole new way of living, a spiritual way of living, as opposed to this human way of living. So, back to the instinctive subtypes, the Enneagram adherents state that, like the 9 passions of the Enneagram points, the instinctual drives act as a force underlying our life strategies, often unconscious yet all-pervasive, and represent our most fundamental way of being, and then a quote from Fav. All right, let's look at our 2, 3, 4 strategies that we're going to conclude today. Again, as I said, we'll look at a very, very brief 2-slide review of the 2. And then to see a 3, we're going to look at a 3 with a 2 wing from today's headlines. And then we'll go into a study of the 4. And then eventually we'll begin the power strategies with the 5. So the 2, 3, 4 strategies. These 3 strategies rate themselves according to how others see them. That's the easy to understand definition of approbation. How others see me. I want them to like me, appreciate me, respect me. In some way, I want their approbation. Their identity is in the hands of others. When they analyze themselves through the appraisal process that we'll review again as we get there, we appraise through 6 basic filters. There are others, but 6 basic filters. Through our self-concept, our attitudes, our moods, our beliefs, our attributions towards what other people have done in the past or how situations are, and our knowledge base. And these people are very self-concept oriented, and they want to be liked because that's how they identify with their self-concept, is how you think of me. Their self-concept doesn't go through and analyze their abilities, their qualities, their attributes. It just wants to know how I relate to you and what you think about me. These 2, 3, and 4 strategies repress their assertive, vindictive power grabbing. And when they do assert themselves or grab for power, they do it indirectly, obliquely, and without noticing that they are doing it. They are nice people. They don't display their aggression openly, so they use manipulation, guilt, and self-pity, the more passive and proper ways of asserting themselves. These people have trouble saying no, standing their ground, and doing what they really want. They do what society wants, or what mother wanted, or what will bring recognition by their current group. They don't do what they want. They do what others want them to do. Instead, they play roles, they live through others, or they what do they do? What's that last word there? They're next to the last word. Lament their helpless lot in life. Yes, I don't know if I can get rid of that with my mouse or not. Yes, I can. How about that? Okay. Their dependency on the esteem and response of others gives them a secondary gain. They are extremely sensitive to the needs and wants of others. Their emotional life depends on them, and we all get good at what we need for a survival. So here's their need that to try to make themselves feel better about themselves, to be happy, and yet that makes them kind of sensitive to other people. They can kind of understand people. So they're people that are good at relating to others. In healthy human good people, this becomes altruism and a nurturing friendship. So they can be great friends. We tend to think of them with their manipulation, their self-pity, the way they feel and what they end up using if you aren't as responsive to them as they want you to be. And quite often they run out of your care for them, your approbation of them, your respect, your admiration, your feelings for them kind of lose their significance to them, so then they'll be off to somebody new. And you'll see these kind of people, they have one best friend, and then all of a sudden they don't have that best friend anymore. They have to find a new best friend who will make them feel good, because that best friend hasn't quite done, the original best friend hasn't quite done the job. In emotional revolt, or in sometimes becoming purely neurotic, it can become a devouring invasiveness or a complete codependence, not to mention flattery or seduction, and even stalking. These people can become stalkers if they're not healthy, human good people, and of course if they're not Christians, not spiritual in their approach to life. People of any type 2 are essentially related to other people, and they relate to them from a standpoint of helpfulness. 2s have a built-in radar for what others might need, and they see themselves as the correct person for satisfying that need. This places 2s, even though they are serving others, in a sort of a one-up position with respect to those they are serving. 2s see themselves as being not only strong enough to care for themselves, but able to care for others as well. They want to occupy a central position in the lives of others, and they accomplish this by being indispensable. You cannot do without these people. They will do everything for you. If you've got a problem, they're right there. They have plenty of advice to give. They have plenty of help to give. They will, if they have some materialism motivation mixed into their approbation motivation, they are very giving people. And they're not the type who will give to you, well, if they're very, very altruistic, good human being 2s, they might not need to give to you openly. Here's what I'm thinking. A 2 who is healthy will give you a gift in private. A 2 who is less healthy, less human good, will make sure that they only give you that around other people, so that other people know that they are doing something special for you. So they want to be recognized for that, because they have this other people that they want to be approved by as well. In any event, whether they give you something privately or publicly, eventually, because we all go from our human good side to our human bad side, eventually they're going to want to be repaid for what they have given you. They're going to use it. They're going to say, well, look what I've done for you. Remember I gave you, and they'll have a list. Remember I gave you that book. Remember I gave you that necklace. Remember I gave you that whatever. But they'll have their long list of things that they have given you, and you haven't done this for me when I really need you. That's how it'll come down with the 2. The 2s have the needs. They need to be appreciated. They need to be needed. They need to receive a considerable amount of attention and gratitude. And as long as you're doing that for them, they'll be your friend forever. You mess up and they're in a bad mood, they're feeling bad about themselves, something, they'll dump you and they'll go for a new friend. Now, instead of going through a review of the 3, I thought that I would use a current event here so you can see someone who is a 3. And this is from the current news. This is about, what's his first name? Blumenthal. Paul Blumenthal. It's not Paul Blumenthal. This is a different one. Well, let's look at it and we'll see his name come up. This is from the Christian Science Monitor. Until this week, the Democratic Attorney General of Connecticut was favored to succeed Christopher Dodd in the Senate. But when the New York Times published evidence, video included, that Mr. Blumenthal had erroneously claimed military service in Vietnam, the calculus changed. Since the initial New York Times story was published, more examples of Blumenthal's misstatements have come to light, in which he talks about his service in Vietnam instead of service during the Vietnam War. The difference is important. Blumenthal, in fact, never did serve in Vietnam, but was in the Marine Corps Reserves stateside after receiving at least 5 deferments. Christopher Shays of Connecticut found it puzzling over time. Actually, I think this is New York Times. I've kind of interspersed Christian Science Monitor and New York Times, and I don't know if I haven't noted which one is which. Christopher Shays of Connecticut found it puzzling over time. His friend, Attorney General Richard Blumenthal, kept revising how he talked about his military service during the Vietnam War. At first, in the 1980s, he was humble. He played it down, Mr. Shays recalled, characterizing it as humdrum desk work. Over the last few years, however, more sweeping claims crept into Mr. Blumenthal's descriptions. He said that Mr. Blumenthal had served in Vietnam and had felt the sting of an ungrateful nation as he returned. He just kept adding to the story the more he told it, Mr. Shays said. So here you see someone who wants to be a success, a 3. The 3s want to be successful. They want to be admired for their success, for their accomplishments. So we have Mr. Blumenthal, who running for Senate, has been an Attorney General, has held other offices in Connecticut, highly respected, thought to be just a wonderful man, as we'll see a little bit later in our story here, by everyone. Just a great man, an impeccable man, the perfect example of a 3, to be seen as the penultimate person in that arena, whatever arena it is. Mr. Shays said he became alarmed enough by the discrepancies that he at times considered mentioning the issue to Mr. Blumenthal, who on Tuesday said he took full responsibility for the occasions when he misspoke about his military history. Notice that he took full responsibility for misspeaking, not for lying, which he baldly did, but he misspoke. He could not bring himself to tell the truth and confess that he had done wrong. Why not? Why not? That's part of being a 3. You cannot admit that you're wrong. It's like a 1. It's like an 8. These are the people who are trying to be with power, with success, all of that together. In the case of the 3, just can't admit to having done anything wrong. So he lies about his lies and said that he just misspoke. As it turned out, Mr. Blumenthal never served in Vietnam, but over time, his identification with veterans of war became so strong that some of those around him, like Mr. Shays, just assumed he had. He made it a point to attend the funeral of every active soldier from Connecticut killed in the line of duty, and he rearranges his schedule so he can speak at the ceremony for soldiers about to deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, so let's do a little psychological analysis here. And what do you see in this person? He's a 3. He's the epitome of success. He's a state office holder now with the desire to serve the state in the Senate. He's a successful man, and by every measurement of success in the political arena. And as a human being, he's a wonderful man. He goes to every funeral for these soldiers. He goes to send them off when they are going to Iraq or Afghanistan. So he not only has this success motivation, But he's also got some too in him, that he wants to be appreciated by buying the respect of these soldiers, the military. Now, does he feel that way because he has guilt that he worked so hard to get 5 deferments so he wouldn't have to go to Vietnam? And then when his deferments ran out, he joined the Marine Reserves so he wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. Is he guilty about that? So that he takes such good care, and we'll see later that he really takes great care for the veterans and military people with problems? Or is it that that's just another part of his desire to be a success? That he has to lie that, oh, by the way, I was a great success as a military person as well. See? So you can see the deceit that you find in a 3. And if you recall, 3s are willing to lie for their story. Their story, anything that would stand in the way of them being seen as the succeeder, as the best, you can lie about. The lie is less important than being seen as being less than the greatest. Okay? A few weeks ago, Mr. Shays attended a ceremony with Mr. Blumenthal in Bridgeport to honor workers killed during an accident. When it was his turn to speak, Mr. Blumenthal at one point brought up the subject of his military service and lamented that when we returned from Vietnam, Americans had spit on soldiers, Mr. Shays recalled. And Mr. Shays says, he is the kind of person I cared enough about that I wish I had nipped this in the bud when it was fomenting. Mr. Blumenthal discussed his past statements about his military service after the New York Times reported Monday night on its website that he had falsely said in March 2008 that he had served in Vietnam and had repeatedly failed to correct media reports that perpetuated the claim. At a news conference on Tuesday in West Hartford, where he was surrounded by veterans, Mr. Blumenthal, 64, a Democratic candidate for Senate, said he had never intended to mislead the public. But in interviews, several military historians and social scientists said the Blumenthal story reflected the strained and unsettled relationship some men of his generation have with the Vietnam War. Some of them, driven by guilt or pride, begin to embellish their role. Even if they did not serve in the war or played no heroic role, they said. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of this phenomenon of exaggerating military service by people who feel nostalgic because they missed their war, said Brian McAllister Lynn, a professor at Texas A&M University who specializes in military history. Mr. Shays, a conscientious objector who avoided the Vietnam War, has his own theory about Mr. Blumenthal's evolving descriptions of his service. I think that it was a way that he quickly bonded with people I am sure he admired and respected. Okay? So there's a little 2 in there. He wanted to be equally admired or needed by them, as we'll see here coming up. But he wanted that admiration and respect. He wanted to be the successful military veteran who had served his country proudly in a war. It's very seductive, he added, recalling his own visits with American service members in Iraq before he left Congress after losing re-election in 2008 as a Republican. When Paul Kingman, a Navy veteran who lost feeling in his feet after chemotherapy, called Mr. Blumenthal's office in 2007, he was trying to get a hearing for disability payments from the Social Security Administration. So it came as a surprise when Mr. Blumenthal himself got on the line. He's a nice guy. He was cordial, Mr. Kingman, 50, said from his home in Naugatuck. He was a 2. Busy people like him with all the rest going on in the state, I was surprised he'd have time for little old me. So you see the 2 aspect of the 3? A week after his conversation with Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Kingman learned that his hearing, which he had been trying to get for nearly 4 years, had been scheduled. I don't know who he talked to, but the next thing you know, I had a hearing, said Mr. Kingman, who at the time was living on $200 a month in food stamps. He stood up for me. The Democratic reaction has been central to his survival thus far. The party is rallying around Blumenthal, blaming the New York Times for playing gotcha and for showing only part of the videotape in which Blumenthal claims Vietnam service. Now, what part of the videotape is pertinent to the story? The part where he claims Vietnam service. So they have set up a straw man here. Well, you only showed the part that he claimed Vietnam service. You didn't show the part about what a nice guy he is, what a good guy he is, what a wonderful man he is, what a successful man he is. See, they don't want you to look at the guilt. They want you to look at everything else. They want you to refocus your attention. Well, it doesn't matter that he's a liar because he's these things. Okay? That's political reaction, political strategy for today. You'll see it everywhere in politics today. Don't look at what's wrong with our candidate. Look at how wonderful he is and omit the fact that he's a scumbag. Next week, we'll look at an example of Mark Souder, who is a congressman, senator from Indiana, who is a good example of a sexual happiness attainment motivator that we'll look at. All right, here is Success Magazine. On the cover, Steve Jobs, the master of innovation. Table of contents, June 2010. And on the website and in the magazine, they have a success poll in every issue. This month's success poll is reinvention. How have you reinvented yourself? I lost weight and got in shape. That's a 3 activity. I started my own business. That's a 3 activity. I took control of my finances to build my wealth. That's 3. I now devote more time to my family. I am the perfect family. What do all of these congressmen say when they are being run out of office for some reason or another? What do they say when they resign? I want to spend more time with my family. Okay? I have made a mess of my public life. I'm no longer the perfect public servant, so now I'm going to go spend more time with my family and become a success as the head of my family. I manage stress better and focus on living in the present. You see, everything about Success Magazine is about being a 3. It's about being a 3. And if you go through, I was going to list you the table of contents of these articles. It's just amazing how it's just all about being a 3, being the best. All right, let's go ahead and start on the 4. People of any type 4. Now remember, 4 is the last of the 2, 3, 4 strategies of approbation. People of any type 4 construct their identities around their perception of themselves as being somehow unique and fundamentally different from others. This deep felt sense of being different from or other than pervades the 4's sense of self and functions as the basis for the 4's attempt to create a persona that properly reflects who they feel they really are. 4's are not content or even able to live out the role assigned to them by their societies or their families. They self-consciously search for an expression they feel will be truly authentic. See pictures on the back table. Okay? They want to be different. They want to be unique. They want to be seen as a very unique person. Of all the types, 4's are the most acutely aware that the persona is a construct, something which has been created and can thus be recreated. This is indeed the fundamental aspect in which 4's are artists. They may or may not be artists in the conventional sense of the term, but all 4's are, in some respect, their own creation. They work hard at creating a persona, that they are unique, and it will very, very often be reflected in the way they dress. Very often in the way they dress. Or how they decorate. what kind of car they drive. When you see a Volkswagen Beetle driving down the road that's painted like a strawberry or it's got the flower petals all over and stuff, you can pretty much bet there's a 4 driving inside that car. Pretty much there's a 4 in there. That's the way they are. They have to express the fact that they're different. You might even be the ones that have 187 bumper stickers all over their car, okay, for all of the, and it's almost always about bad things. Save the whales, save the fish, save the this, save the that, because that's tragedy, and they dwell on tragedy. So those people might also be a 4. They might also be religiously motivated and want to fix everything. They might be an 8. As well, but a lot of times those bumper sticker people with tons of bumper stickers are 4s. But definitely the decoration of myself and the decoration of my home, my automobile, has to be unique and attention gathering. That's a 4 kind of way of life. 4s generally construct a persona and project an image which has flair or style. This style may be, for instance, one of casual elegance, the shabby chic, or it may be more flagrantly counterculture, but whichever image is chosen, it will tend to bear the 4's own original stamp and will be an expression of the 4's current sense of self. So one of the current 4 phenomenon that we see now is the what do they call them? Goth. Okay? Goth is a 4 kind of construct. Hippies were 4s. Hippies are still 4s. Still have people out there who've never gotten over being a hippie 4. But hippies were 4s. We all wanted to be different, so we all dressed alike in our non-traditional clothing. And that was our stamp of originality, was to all look different than our parents, but all look the same as our peers. There is, it'll be an expression of the 4's current sense of self. There's a paradoxical quality to this whole endeavor. 4s strive for authenticity, for an expression of themselves which is true, but the image they portray fails to convey what they see as their true depths and complexity. You see, they do it superficially so that you can see how deep they are and how complex they are, but people see the superficial and don't ever see that true depth that they're trying to get you to see. Okay? So it falls short of the 4's own personal ideal. So how do you deal with a 4? What are they looking for? Their true depth and complexity. So you just go right past their appearance. You go right past their decoration and go to their true depth and complexity and talk to them about what you're learning here about the way a 4 is. That they want to be appreciated for who they are that's different than a 3 or a 2. Okay? They're in approbation as their primary motivation, but they're not in approbation like a 3 or a 2. They're not there trying to help you and give for you and get you to be indebted to them to love them. And they're not there to impress you with how successful they are. They're the opposite of success. Okay? They're the opposite of the culture's identification and definition of success. But they want you to appreciate that. They want you to appreciate that. This sense of perpetually falling short contributes to the 4's sense of inadequacy. Okay? They'll always feel inadequate, as 4s feel that they are not only unable to live up to society's ideal, but to their own individual ideals as well. Because we all, in our human nature constructs, in whichever happiness motivator we use, we always know that it fails. Deep down inside. Doesn't matter if it's materialism. I can have all the money I want. It fails to bring me happiness. I can have all the friends and respect and admiration in the arena of approbation that I can get, but it still fails to bring me happiness. Drugs. In fact, that was one I was going to use for an example from a program that I'm trying to record because I missed part of it, but it was about drugs and how this man was he was an addict at age 10 and was doing crack cocaine at 15, thrown out of high schools. By the age of 20, was living in somebody else's car, had nothing, was just a real bum, but a big-time druggie. And he got to the point, and this is the point where God touches people. He got to the point where he realized that the drugs didn't make him happy. That's really all he wanted, was to be happy. And the drugs weren't doing it. And he ended up getting saved, becoming a Christian, and now he has a ministry, trying to help others. He's written a book. I think it's called Addict at 10, or Addict at Age 10, Addict at 10. He's written this book. And it's all about his life and how we need to do better to spot these people in their addiction at an earlier age, and to do more for them, and so on. So what's he done? He's gone from a druggie to a human good, help fight drugs. Okay? What's his biggest danger? Going back. Because he's trying to replace the low end of the continuum of human nature with the high end to get happiness that way. Okay? Now, I don't know him and I haven't read his book, so he may be walking a spiritual life, and that may not be true at all. But if it isn't, if he is doing it in human good, then his danger is he'll fall again. Now, well, in fact, the interviewer, this was actually not a show on TV, it was a radio interview, and the interviewer asked him, said, of all the drugs you were involved with, crack and marijuana and heroin and meth and all of that, did you drink? Yes. Yeah, I was drunk. I was drunk and high all the time. And did you smoke cigarettes? Oh yeah. He said, which one of all of them was the hardest to give up? He said, cigarettes. He said, really? Not meth? I heard meth is impossible to give up. He said, no, I know lots of people that gave up meth. Crack, lots of people have given up crack. Cigarettes are the hardest. Why? And he answered the question like this: because it's acceptable to the public. See, that approbation thing, well, I can do this drug because it's acceptable to people, and I'm not looked down upon. So there's that little bit of approbation in his chemical. All right? So that's how you can kind of spot things, by seeing where people are, and then, of course, being able to minister to that. Being able to minister to that with the gospel and what God has to offer in lieu of that in the spiritual life. Let's see. The dynamic of striving and falling short is at the core of the four sense of shame, frustration, and heightened feelings of self-consciousness. To be sure, fours fight their feelings of inferiority with an equally strong sense of superiority. Remember, all inferiority complexes are superiority complexes in disguise. Nobody thinks that they're a scumbag. They think that they're failing to live up to their ideal, what they really are, and so people will see them as a scumbag. But they can see themselves as scumbags and disappointed about it because they know what they really are. Inferiority complexes are about superiority complexes. Fours tend to feel a sense of disdain for whatever is ordinary and for the common sorts of lives with which most people seem to content themselves. They tend to feel that their outsider status, their sense of style, and their heightened sense of self-consciousness confer on them a stamp of genuineness and class. Well, we'll stop there and pick up with the four next hour with slide 26 out of 71. We're a little behind schedule here. I've only put 71 slides in this time because I thought it might take a little extra time. And 71 might be too many. Okay. Please pray with me, and we'll close this hour of our of our study and take a 10-minute break. Father, we're grateful for this time together. We're grateful that you have provided human good along with human bad in the sinful nature, the way the sinful nature was acquired, so that we might have a stable society with human good people in charge. And so we pray for our leaders who are human good, that they will continue to lead us in human good, and that we will have a renewal of either human good or spiritual lives in our leaders, so that we might prosper as a nation. We thank you that you have shown us how we fit into some of these classifications of a 2, a 3, or a 4, so that we might learn how to reject our human nature in favor of our spiritual nature. We thank you for these things and ask that you bless this hour. In Jesus'